All right, 9:25, and thanks for joining us here on CTV Morning Live. Our next guest really needs no introduction, and it's an absolute honor to be sitting here on our couches next to news icon Lloyd Robertson. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Annette. Good to be here.
And, you know, it's really, you are here because after more than 40 years in the broadcasting chair, in the anchor chair, where every night you would wrap up your day with, that's the kind of day it's been. You now have put pen to paper with your new memoir, That's the Kind of Life It's Been. And what an incredible read. I crammed for the past 2 days. And I, yeah, as Kurt mentioned earlier on the show, went out on Wednesday, got the book, and was just thrilled to read it. And what a story. You know, as anchors, we don't often hear, we don't tell our stories. And now you've decided to put it all together for us as Canadians to read. Why did you decide to do
Well,
this?
you know, it was difficult for me to make the decision to do it because I'd spent my whole life observing others in the parade. Unusual for an anchor to get into the parade himself, of course, because you're always doing commentary on what's passing in front of you. So it took me a while to make up my mind to do it. And I also come from an era where you were seen and not heard, where you could never be too big for your britches, all of those old expressions. But when I got near the end of my anchor time in July 2010, people had been saying to me for a couple of years, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? So I thought, okay, I'll write a couple of chapters. And I did a couple of chapters then, put them away for a little while, and then in 2011, about a year later, the pressure increased. If you're ever going to do it, you have to do it now. So I pulled out those chapters, looked at them, and thought, okay, I'm going to do something. I realized that a lot of anchors had written books in the past. You know, Knowlton Nash had written books, CBC, Peter Truman, Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw. So I thought, all right, I'll try mine.
My turn.
So that was the result of it. And I worked hard at it from the spring, summer of 2011, and I met my deadline for the final manuscript, which was February 2012, and there you are.
You are very honest in this book about your upbringing. You talk quite candidly about your mother and her mental illness. How was that, writing that and speaking about that?
It was very difficult. Dan Shore, an old CBS correspondent, said, always do the easy stuff first, which usually is your early life. But I found my early life quite difficult to talk about because my mother was stricken by all sorts of afflictions, mental illness. She had bipolar, obsessive-compulsive disorder, what we would call paranoid with a touch of schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. So she was really having a lot of difficulty in her life. She couldn't be a proper mother to her son. I'm sure she wanted to be. I know that in those brief encounters we had where we could communicate with one another, I know she loved me. But at the age of 14, she had a lobotomy, which kind of flatlined her emotionally. So for the rest of the time, I was able to make contact with her, but not very substantive contact. My father, however, was amazing. He was 60 years old when I was born. So he began to get physical ailments later in life. The result was that I had, you know, I was shunted around from neighbors to half-brothers and half-sisters, and there were lots of those because there were 8 kids from the first family. But I think most of all, what I learned from all that was that I had to get out on my own and start early.
And you did in Stratford.
Yeah, so the world of the imagination took over me, and it was radio that did that for me, because I tell in the book there the story of being on the scene when the troops marched home on January 16th, 1946, which is the parade.
I have to quote you because that's one of my favorite parts in the book where you say, I was swept up in the excitement of the moment and that buoyant feeling that stayed with me on big broadcast occasions for all my life. I was there at the center of something important, something bigger than myself. You recognized right out of the gate that you could be in the front seat of world events and have this responsibility to share it, make sense of it all for the rest of us in this country. And you did that so eloquently for over 40 decades. I want to talk about how you were a trailblazer in a lot of ways for anchors, and the fact that you fought hard to have some editorial input in the writing and the stories that were covered, and you didn't have that at CBC. You made the move over to CTV, thank goodness, for all of us, and you really changed that aspect. You weren't just someone who sat there and read. You had a lot of say in the stories that were covered.
Well, there were really 2 reasons for that. One was survivability, because I knew that as the anchor of a newscast in the 70s, certainly in the U.S., and it was happening in Britain as well. All of the anchors were involved in the editorial process of putting the news together. And you know, you'd talk to people in restaurants or bars, and they would say they would want to talk to you about the news. They felt you were really involved in getting it together, working with the people in the newsroom. I could not say that. My job really was to walk in, pick it up, and read it. And I knew that that had to change, and I wanted to change with it. But it was very, very difficult because at the time there were many unions at the CBC, a lot of overlapping jurisdictions, and the writers wrote and the announcers read, and that's the way it was. Now, when it came to doing, and this was the great irony, when it came to doing specials like elections and so forth, the union realized that, you know, we can't write every word on that, on that kind of coverage, because the anchor has to have freedom to editorialize and to vamp, fill time when necessary. So I was allowed some leeway there, but when it came to working in the newsroom, no, nothing. So I just knew that that had to change for me if I was to survive as an anchor and move forward in the industry. And that's one thing that I think I would say to young people today. Be aware of being adaptable, because adaptability is what moves you forward in this business. Being able to change with the flow of the way the industry is changing. And now it's challenging and changing all the time, of course. So that helped me, and when I moved to CTV, it was a wide open field because I was able to report, I was able to write, and I was able to grow as a broadcast journalist.
Now, in your career, you've covered, I mean, the list goes on and on and on of remarkable moments. What for you stands out as being your favorite and why? Well,
a lot of people ask that question, and I really boil it down to 2 or 3 because it's really difficult to isolate one. But I think when I was covering the landing of men on the moon for the very first time in July of 1969, I remember going out onto the parking lot that night, looking up at the moon. Neil Armstrong had already put down his boot on the moon's surface. Aldrin was about to do that. And I thought, here I am, this little kid from Stratford, lucky enough to be involved in something like this. And I pinched myself.
Wow.
And then, of course, there were the big stories like, you know, the Kennedy assassination. I was around for that day. I read that bulletin on radio that day in November 1963. The same bulletin the rest of the world was recounting at the time, and I mentioned that in the book. But I think 9/11 was the bigger tragedy of those two, because 9/11 had such an effect on the world and on the lives of every single one of us. I mean, not only were 3,000 people killed that day, but it was also a new normal for the rest of us. And all you have to do now is go to an airport, and there you are. You know that life changed after September 2001.
There are so many more questions I'd love to ask you, and you know, a lot of the answers, of course, are in Lloyd's new book, and one of them that I didn't get to is why he turned down a job in the Senate that was offered in 2003. I wanted to talk to him about that, but if you want to know that answer, you're going to have to get the book. Lloyd Robertson, The Kind of Life It's Been, now out. I grabbed it, read it. It's a great read, and I am just so thrilled that you came in to join us today. We're going to actually have Lloyd sign the book we have right here, and then, of course, the first person who can email us in and give us the answer to the town Lloyd grew up in. It's a small Ontario town. There's also another famous person from that town right now. We mentioned it a couple of times this morning. So if you can let us know what town Lloyd grew up in, where he got his radio debut as well, then you can be the owner of his new memoir. So email that answer into ottawacontest@ctv.ca. Lloyd, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.